find out more about that, I talked to the English philosopher Colin McGinn at his home in New York. Before I start asking you about your beliefs and disbeliefs, I'd like to get into a little bit of an analysis of what we are saying when we talk about believing at all. There seem to be some situations in which one says, I believe this, that, I believe in this, in ordinary things.
Well, the usual idea is there are implicit beliefs or tacit beliefs. Belief is a technical term as it's used in philosophy and psychology. I mean, it really just means what you're going to take for granted, what you'll act on, what you'll assent to, what you might gamble on. That means you're committed to its being the case. Belief is just an umbrella term to capture all the varieties of assent, of takings to be true. And so that's a huge variety of different things, actually, all the way from, I believe there's a table in front of me to I believe there's no God, or I believe in, a supreme moral principle, or I believe in democracy. I mean, they're all valid uses of the word belief, but different phenomena from case to case.
Well, now, in the case of believing, it isn't, when someone has a belief, or believes, they don't have to be in that state of mind consciously all the time in order to be the upholder of a belief.
Exactly. Now, you can say if somebody fast asleep, he believes that Paris is in France, and it's true, because beliefs are dispositional. Implicit is another term for it. They're unlike thoughts. A thought is an occurrent phenomenon. When you, at a given moment, think of something, then you sort of occurrently believe it.
The fact is that it sounds rather odd, doesn't it, to say that someone is believing at a particular moment. One can't be in a state of belief all the time. On the other hand, that doesn't mean that we stop believing if we happen to have something else on our mind. It's just that belief is not, in any sense, an episode. It's impossible to say at any given moment that one is entertaining a belief. Now, that doesn't mean that the notion of time is actually inapplicable to belief. After all, someone can become a believer, having not been one sometime earlier, as in the case of St. Paul, for example, who was dramatically converted to belief in the divinity of Christ at a particular moment. But once acquired, dramatically or otherwise, belief is not a continuously experienced mental state. In fact, it's somewhat questionable whether belief is actually a state of mind at all. It's certainly not one for which there is a corresponding state of brain that one might be able to identify using a CAT scan, allowing one to say, oh yes, he's having a belief at this moment. Someone who believes in God, for example, isn't necessarily entertaining that thought, whatever it is, all the time. If he's trying to remember where he's left his keys, for example, the thought of God's existence, or whatever, isn't in or on his mind at the time. And when he suddenly finds his key, the state of mind of believing in God doesn't suddenly reassert itself after having been pushed off centre stage. It doesn't resume its rightful state after what was a moment earlier a lapse of belief. It's not like that at all. Now, what I've said about belief is also true of knowledge. I know the alphabet. I know my multiplication tables. In fact, I know a large number of things without being explicitly conscious of any of them at any particular moment. But although belief resembles knowledge, there's a very important difference between the two. In the case of belief, you can say that someone believes X and that he was wrong. But it sounds rather odd to say that someone knows X and is wrong. It's part of the definition of knowing something that it is the case, whereas believing something to be the case is a state of mind about which you could be proved to be wrong. Well, my beliefs, religious or otherwise, represent dispositions rather than a particular state of mind which I might or might not experience at a particular moment. In other words, instead of being an episode in my mental life, my belief is expressed by certain tendencies. a tendency to entertain certain thoughts or feelings. And in the case of religious beliefs, it also involves the disposition to participate in certain social actions which we call rituals, prayers, services, and so on, all of which dramatize in some way or another certain attitudes which I assume with regard to the meaning of life and the possibility of its continued existence after my death. In one way or another, these rituals imply the existence of things or entities which I cannot know, in whose existence I must simply believe. Largely, we tend to invoke the notion of belief when there is some sort of disagreement in the world around you about whether one does assent to this, that, or the other.
Exactly. That's when we bring the notion up. When we're having a discussion about what do you believe, what are your beliefs, means which questionable, debatable issues do you take a particular stand on? And that's when we use the word belief.
So that it's about debatable issues that,
I think it is about
belief
issues.
Tends to...
Yeah, exactly. That's how we use it. So that's why primarily it's used in connection with, I would say, religion and politics. Because those are issues where people hotly debate the fundamentals of it. And so they tend to say, well, this is my belief about the political situation. I believe we should not go to war with Iraq, you know. I believe there's only one God.
Now, I'm sure that Colin McGinn would agree with me that it's important to recognize the different implications which the notion of belief has in the case of religion on the one hand and politics on the other. You see, when it comes to politics, and for that matter ethics, belief refers to how things ought to be. I believe in equal rights, I believe in democracy, and when I say any of these, I'm referring to moral preferences. Whereas in the case of religion, although there are of course beliefs which refer to how things ought to be, the main body of religious belief consists of assertions as to the existence of this, that, or the other. Well, even at this point you can begin to see that belief is rather a complicated idea. And what makes it even more complicated is the extent to which it can be brought about voluntarily, if at all. And yet the states of mind associated with belief can seem so enviable that you might conceivably wish to believe. And in fact, Colin McGinn, for example, says indeed that he would quite like to believe.
I would like religion to be true. I'd like it to be true. Because I'd like there to be immortality. I'd like there to be rewards for those who've been virtuous and punishments for those who've not been virtuous, especially the punishments would be good. You know, there's no justice in this world, and it would be good if there was some cosmic force that distributed justice in the proper way that it should be. And it still is, to me, a constant source of irritation and pain that wicked people prosper and virtuous people don't.
But he doesn't believe.
So you feel disappointed, and you feel, you know, the fact that death is death and that's the end of you is most people find difficult to take. So it would be nice if those things were there, but I just don't believe they're there anymore.
So what's the problem? Or to put it another way, is there anything that Colin could do to convince himself that he was, after all, immortal and that he would, in some way or other, survive his own death? Well, the fact is that those who do believe in such things often encourage those who don't to make some sort of effort. It's a question, they say, of making a leap of faith. Well, the problem is that it's quite hard to imagine the sort of exercises that one would have to undertake in order to make such a leap, if indeed it was a leap. The best one can do is to visualize the sort of experiences, misfortune, say, or even revelations, which might bring about a change of mind. But that's hardly a leap, and some people might